bank it ahead. Konechny tips it. He got it past the defenseman and gets to the puck. Konechny cutting it on goal. He scores! A beauty from Konechny, and the Flyers take a 1-0 lead. Beat the defenseman, then beat the goaltender. And Konechny's third goal in the last 2 games has the Flyers on top.
TheFourthPeriod.com presents the O&B Puckcast, as we have an O&B special for you as promised, and we have some special guests with us today, and stay tuned for a really exciting interview with an author of a new book about Philadelphia professional hockey. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Of course, I am your host, Isaiah, and with us for a returning visit is our buddy Steve Pearls Wisdom. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. And, of course, we can't forget our buddy, our pinch hitter here, for his first appearance on the O&B Puckcast. It is Mr. Steel Flyers.
Hey, how y'all doing, man?
Great.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor and a great privilege. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're definitely going to be into what we're talking about today. So why are we here? What are we talking about? We just had a show Monday with Russ Cohen and all that. We're talking about the draft. But you know what?
That was a great show. Great show.
Appreciate that. But
I love Russ. Love Russ.
Yeah, Russ knows his stuff. And he went tay-to-tay with Dan Silver talking about some
That
of
was great, man. You guys, I'll tell you what, that was awesome listening to you guys going back and forth there, because you guys have such great ideas about stuff.
Yeah, well, you know, it gets a little deep in the weeds for people, but if you love the draft, those guys really on it. And we talked about some of the prospects that may or may not be ready to make some kind of impact. But there's one big area that we can't ignore, because, listen, you know, today is the 26th. They're going to have a draft on, the 6th and the 7th? And then free agency begins on, the 9th?
9th.
And what does this all mean? This means we have this compacted offseason, and we have moves that are already being made. There's players that are being bought out. There are rumors of players that are being bought out. And I want to make it Flyer-centric here in the beginning. Steve, let me start with you. Okay. And you look at the Flyers, and they have, $74.5 million committed. When you have a cap that is going to be $81.5 million for the next couple of years, and then I think it goes up another $1 million after that. But it's just a lot of decisions have to be made. And yet, when you look at what Chuck Fletcher did last year, he wanted to just add enough pieces to see if this crew, this core, could be helped along by these young kids. Now we have the results in. Okay, so let's talk about the results, how the Flyers played, and where do we go? Maybe what you think you would like to do, and what do you think the Flyers are actually going to do?
Well, I think what I would like to do is probably what the Flyers would like to do. I mean, they'd like to shed a few contracts that are weighty on their salary cap, namely, possibly Van Riemsdyk, or there's been a lot of talk about Gosh Despear. However, with this environment, that may be very difficult to do, especially with what it might cost to do so. So with that not being able to come to fruition, I'd be looking to find some cheapies out there. And the good thing is that could come up, because people will be, like you said, buying players out. So you could probably get some players for a relatively decent price to fill in some roles. The roles I would be specifically looking at myself, a lot of people are talking about scoring, but I don't know. I think with Lindy, I'd like to see what he can do now that he's back on his feet again. I think if he wouldn't have been sick and we would have had him in the playoffs, we would have had a little easier time with Montreal and probably a lot better time against the Islanders. And he's still only 24 with a lot of growth. So the two holes that I think are feasible, even if we can't move off some salary ourselves, I think would be a third line center role. And I'd like to see maybe if we're not going to do something with Ghost, although I think we probably will in some way, another offensive defenseman would be fantastic on my wish list for the offseason.
Okay, so I'm looking at maybe somebody like Tyson Barrie, some player along that line, and maybe help with the power play to charge that up a little bit.
I was thinking, I had a couple ideas actually, one in particular. With Montreal getting Edmondson in for their defense there, they've piled up their defense pretty good. They've got Alexander Romanov, Edmondson, Petrie, Weber. I don't know where they're going to have a place for a young guy named Victor Mete. And I think he could be available on the cheap. And he's a restricted free agent, so he doesn't have much bargaining power. We could probably sign him for $2 million, 2.5, and give him a shot for 2 years. I really like this kid. I think he's going to be fine. He's just been kind of not used properly in Montreal. And if you gave him to AV, I think you'd be very surprised at the results you might get off of him. As far as forward is concerned, looking at a team like Arizona, who's totally capped out and already talking about getting rid of Ekman Larson, for sure the Soderberg is not going to be back for them. And I think at 34 years old, Mr. Soderberg, he's not going to get $5 million again. You just might be able to get him for $2.5 million if you give him a 2-year contract. So even with our $7 million little space that we got, possibly moving a couple other pieces around, we could fill a Soderberg in, and then if Patrick comes back, he can go down in the lineup. If not, he can play third line minutes. He's big. We also could use a nice. We brought size in for a reason with Thompson and Grant, but they're not really at that role. Here's a guy who has the size, is that role, and might be able to get him in the $2.5 million mark.
Gotcha. Steele, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in regard to my prior question?
I do agree with a lot of things that Perlo said, but I think we already have a third line center already on the team. And I think that would be Scott Laughton. I really think that we need to move on from some of the bad contracts as well. And I do agree that we're going to need to shed some salary and we're going to need to shed some contracts. The only problem is that we're not in a buyer's market right now. And we're going to not really be able to shed much of anything unless we throw in some other things in with it or unless we completely buy out contracts. You know what I mean? So we're going to end up trading money for money is basically what we're going to end up doing virtually no matter what we do. And look, if you're looking for that elite third line center that is over 6 foot, that can bang bodies, that can pot goals, that can eat up minutes on the power play, can do all those things. Look, instead of trying to buy somebody, why don't we draft somebody? Look, I know that's not going to solve the problem for next year because I think we have Scott Laughton. We can move into the 3C. I just really feel that he has matured enough to the point where he could take that role. Okay, and then look, we're not going to be able to afford anybody expensive, so we're going to have to get people on the cheap. There's no way we're going to be able to, unless we trade a huge amount of salaried contracts along with picks, along with other players, along with prospects. That's the only way we're going to get any of those elite players. The Flyers have to look on the cheap this year and be thankful that we got the team that we do, because until you look at re-signing the players that we need to re-sign, okay, like we just re-signed Lyon the other day, okay? So we need to re-sign some of those guys in order to maintain our core, unless we're going to not re-sign those guys and then look for players elsewhere. Other than that, I really agree with everything that is said. I mean, there's some players that are out there, but until we really know who's going to be available and what we're really going to do, it's all speculation.
Yeah. I think some of the speculation is out there. I think, you look at somebody like Soderberg. He's 34 and a little bit of a declining player. And he kind of found his way out of Colorado when they brought, Nazem Kadri in. But you know that Marc-Andre Fleury is lobbying to somehow stay in Las Vegas. That's not going to work. They have to pay Leonard. Bobby Ryan's being bought out. King Henry with the Rangers.
He might not be a bad fit.
Yeah,
Bobby Ryan might not be a bad fit. I've been hearing rumors about that.
I was going to mention that too, actually.
Yeah.
But if you could play center,
nah.
but if you play Lawton on center, and I don't know if I'm as big as you are with Lawton on center, but if that's the way we're going to roll, then maybe you could consider Bobby Ryan, because you can get a hometown discount from him probably and stuff like that. I don't know what the number would be for him. Hopefully in the 2 to 2.5 maybe.
I don't
about what Pitlick would be. He's about what Pitlick would be. If we had to re-sign Pitlick, we'd have to re-sign Pitlick for that kind of money, right?
I don't think so. I think
you think we could get Pitlick cheaper?
$1.5 million. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey.
Yeah, because Pitlick was. I forget. I don't have his salary for last year.
Million.
About $1 million, 1.1 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, don't quote me on that. But yeah, I mean, there's also rumors that Ryan Strome and Tony DeAngelo could be out there in the market. It's going to be a crazy marketplace because they're going to have to, in New York, they're going to have to get rid of, like I said, Lundqvist and it is going to be a unique offseason. But getting back to the Flyers, that's the big question. When you come out of this offseason, was last year's attempt at salvaging this crew, this core, was this the last gasp of that, or is the expediency because of the pandemic and the static salary cap that the Flyers are kind of stuck, going to have to be treading water? And then we're looking at a situation where both Giroux, Voracek are aging another year out of their primes. So, I guess the question is, Perlo, when is the Flyers Stanley Cup contention window begin? Is that on hold for practical reasons, or can they do something by moving a Ghost, which I agree with? I think they are going to move Ghost. He just doesn't fit here. Fine. But they're going to need another defenseman to come in. Was it an offensive guy? Or are they going to want someone more sure-handed because their defense was undressed and exposed? In these playoffs, in 13 games, they were outplayed virtually. In 39 periods, they were probably outplayed 70% of the time over the course of these games.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's a really good question. Now, I'm going to say that I myself was a huge Hextall supporter. I really understand what he was doing. Although I was kind of play the kid Carter Hart guy, that would have been maybe the only thing that I disagreed with. And who am I to disagree? But since I'm here, that's what we're supposed to be doing. So I did agree with his taking our time in building this team. Now that didn't come to fruition because of ownership, I would imagine, said, I don't want to wait anymore or whatever. Chuck Fletcher comes in, grabs a guy like Niskanen to help these kids along. I kind of get it. I'm not really going against any of these decisions. The question now is, since they changed their train of thought, how exactly are we, what is our window right now? And our window, I guess, like you just mentioned, has to be right now. I think this year, we got to start making some pretty bold moves throughout the year. I don't know if we have to do it now, but as we start to get through the year, trade deadline, all of those things like that, I think we have really very little choice now to do it now, because I mean, Giroux's not getting any younger, Voracek's not getting any younger, and I don't see anything on our roster right now that screams replacement for those guys. So yeah, that was kind of what Hextall was saying, is like I would like to see us have a pool of people on our farm and our that we can say, yes, Giroux's going to retire, we got this. This is going to happen. Voracek's got to go, we got this. And we did not wait for that. And now it's like a little bit of question marks. Go for right now. Now, going for right now, I get, because you've got Carter Hart. And this is what I've been saying all the time. When we have a goaltender like that, it's perfectly understandable to try to win every year, because we've seen in Dallas a Hudobin can do for a team, right? Yeah. So you on paper, Dallas probably shouldn't be there, except for the paper that says goaltender.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and listen, Khudobin's been good, and I think the cream's rising to the top in this final. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But finishing up with the Flyers, that is the question, Steele. They're kind of betwixt and between, because if they go one direction and kind of stay the course, then they're going to age out another year with Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek. Yeah. And really, there's not any indication that outside of some massive internal growth, a return by Patrick, and there's a big question mark over him, a return to form by Lindblom, and actually an improvement in his play, a Konechny taking another step, Farabee taking another step. Frost hasn't played hockey in 6 months, so you don't know what is going to go with that. And we may not have a season that begins until mid-January. So as you can see, there's a lot of questions mounting in, and mounting up, I should say. And I'll leave them all to you, Steele. I know you have all the answers.
Well, I will say this. I really liked – I agree with what Perlo said. I liked what Hextall was doing. It's just that I think he picked the wrong coach to try to progress through things. And I think that threw him back about 2 years, and that's what I think is part of what got him let go. Because he was not ready to play the kids, because I don't think that Hextall was able to coach them. So that's why I think that's part of why their change in vision happened there, okay? Because if you look at what Hextall did, he really stocked the shelves. He really put together a farm team. He really put together a huge amount of depth at defense, at goaltending. You know what I'm saying? So he did a really good job. And Fletcher has continued to build on that by drafting some of the players that he's drafted. Farabee being one of them. I mean, look at the kid. He's now playing now. Good, solid minutes for the team. So I'm also a fan of this too, and I'm going to probably get a lot of flack for this. I would much rather build from the draft, and I would much rather build from the draft of guys that are over 6 feet tall and weigh more than 200 pounds. Okay? And I think that our window is closing. I think that we need to do stuff now in order to make it happen, because if we don't, we're going to lose Giroux. We're going to lose Jake. We're going to lose those guys in their prime, and it's going to be to the point where it's like, you're going to have to move these guys in order to get younger people to come in to try to then help you hoist the cup. You see what I'm saying? So I think the window is now. I think we need to take care of things now, and I think we need to shed some guys that, although they were brought in to help us during this period of time, we need to get rid of those guys, bring in the kids. If you're going to play the kids, and let them play. Look at where we got to this point with, 60% of the team being the rookies or first or second year players?
Yeah, they had 8 or 9 players this year playing their first game.
Play the first game.
Mentioned that.
Exactly.
Well, let me interject here, though. I don't want to rewrite the novel on Ron Hextall. It might be a novel. It might actually be nonfiction. I don't know. But I think Ron Hextall was so married to his plan that he really had a tough time on the pro side. He didn't do a good job there. And when was he going to pull the trigger? And I think three of us would concede that Voracek and G have exited their primes. So when was that window under Hextall? And I think he just was on permanent temporary hold. And there was never a good time for Ron, and if you listen to the latest some interviews that he's on, he's still in shock. Well, gee, Ron, you can't let the vine just wither like this and expect the team to just come out and compete all the time. And in terms of the kids, well, kids are just that. They may be good, they may be bad. You might have Svechnikov and Sebastian Aho. The Flyers don't have anybody like that. Those guys are going to be stars. And the one thing about the draft is you may or may not get stars that are in upper echelon that may go to all-star games. The two guys I mentioned and Matthew Barzal. But the Flyers have a lot of nice players. And I expect Provorov to be on an all-star team, Travis Konechny, of course. And that's good, but these aren't elite players, so you have to have a lot of depth. And that takes time, which goes to the urgency issue of, again, between Perlo. The thing is that the Flyers are kind of stuck. Listen, I'm not going to lie. If I could convince Claude Giroux to waive his no-move clause, so I could kind of take this window and kick it down the road and get some young players and free up that cap space, I would. I'll be honest with you. Because, listen, look, they made the playoffs in 2012. Nice run. Then they finally get there this year. I understand it was a different kind of year and it wasn't fair in the bubble, but fine. They were outplayed. What gives people the optimism that the window is really now without some serious, I guess, infusion of talent that addresses needs that they have, the needs for more goal scoring, particularly how it translates on the power play, the third line center, another defenseman who's sure-handed with the puck. That's 3 players right there.
And none of those guys come cheap.
No?
Yeah, we like to, Steele and I like to talk about, if we did a podcast, we call it the Elephant in the Room podcast. The elephant in the room here is that probably Voracek and Giroux should have been gone already.
Yep.
If Hextall was going to be doing what he wanted to do, the problem was he wasn't allowed to do what he wanted to do. I think he probably would have traded them off. If you're going to do a retool and rebuild like that, they probably should have been traded, and you could have used the little bit of cap money to bring in some different veterans to help those kids out. And this is where we're stuck at, right? This is what we're talking about. We're looking at this roster going, is Voracek and Giroux going to bring us there? Really? Is that what's going to happen here? Doesn't look like it to me.
No.
That's the problem. That's really what the problem
is.
They're
good players.
But
you can't. They can't be like, when you hear AV, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when AV talks about changing their legacy, big boy pants, he's really kind of fueling the fire, trying to get these guys to get to that other level that they never really reached outside of a couple isolated shifts.
Yep. Can't mess with that. I mean, that just hits the nail on the head right there. Look, we don't have that Connor McDavid. We don't have that Sidney Crosby. We don't have that, you know what I mean? We don't have that player on our team. Okay, we thought that maybe Konechny, but no. We thought that maybe, look, Couturier, I think Couturier is in a different level all to himself. But his game is different.
Yeah.
Okay, Giroux, he's an elite points producer, but he's not an elite goal scorer. Okay,
he's not even an elite point producer.
Yeah, he's not anymore.
Well,
he was.
not the last 2 years, right?
At one time, you had an elite point producer, yes.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that we don't have that player that makes other teams put that name up on the whiteboard and go, this is who we have to plan against. Look, I understand. If you're going to build and have depth, then you need to have more than, like back in 2010 when we had more than 10 guys that scored 20 goals.
Right.
If we don't have that, then it doesn't matter how much depth you have at scoring. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's only going to take you so far.
So to bring this full circle back to some kind of resolution, maybe some kind of consensus, it appears as if the Flyers really have to get at least the Gostisbehere contract out and free up that money. That'll allow them to pay Now they're not going to bring back. I don't think they're going to bring back Grant or Thompson. I don't see the point. I mean, you got Linus Sandin coming. You're going to have Lazinski. Allison's going to vie for a spot. Bunneman could get a regular spot. I think there was a fan of ours who told us that Kimmo Timonen said that Mikko Koivu could end up as an option for the Flyers, and that would be on the fourth line. Maybe that's a veteran that our buddy Nico. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name, but I'll give him some attribution. But no, he said that Kimmo Timonen on a podcast brought up Mikko's name as somebody who could become in the Philly. So, okay, there's a fourth line center. That means Lawton's a third line winger. Okay, so we're putting a team together. But who's that third line center? Who's going to help that power play? I don't. Is Bobby Ryan really that guy? And who's a defenseman? They're going to get a guy like Brendan Dillon. Maybe he's a guy who might be out there who's affordable. They got to work this stuff out because they were exposed.
I don't think Brendan's going to be affordable, actually. But
what's that?
Yeah, that's why I was thinking Soderberg. If you're going to roll with this lineup and basically put the pressure on Carter Hart to win us the cup, we would probably need to make sure that we don't go into a playoffs with anything close to what our third and fourth line look like this year.
That would be helpful.
So if we got Soderberg for now until Frost can take that spot, or if Patrick comes back, we can probably fill the fourth line role internally up until we need to maybe reevaluate that. But he can score. He can play on the power play. Like, I really like the guy. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I think for a short-term play, I really like what he can bring to the table. I would rather actually have him than Koivu.
Okay, he was certainly more productive. He had 17 goals, 35 points in 70 games. He was a little bit backward with possession, although the prior year he was not a great face-off guy. I don't know if he played a lot of time. I'm trying to think how many he actually took. I don't have that total. Oh,
he can play wing too.
Yeah.
So if you can, that's what I really like, us grabbing people that can play more than one position.
Yeah. He's a big guy. He's 6'3", 210. Does he play a heavy game?
Fairly heavy, yeah. I mean, as far as Europeans go, heavy. You know what I'm talking about. Like, he's not going to go out and beat somebody down, but he's not going to back down, and he's going to. He's not afraid to use his body. That's for sure.
So he finishes checks and stuff like that.
Yeah, but the main thing is winning battles. That's the Flyers can win battles versus the Islanders.
That's kind of what he's known for, actually, is winning battles.
I mean, it's an option. It sounds like it'll be a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
we're so tight up against the cap.
Yeah.
We're so tight up
like
against the
I said,
cap.
I really like Mete, and I have a feeling that Montreal doesn't. And I think that he can be had for probably a way better price than he should be had for. I really like him. Yeah, he's only 21 years old. The kid can move. He's got creativity. That's what I wanted to mention here, too, and I've mentioned it several times. If there's one thing I find the Philadelphia Flyers missing, it's creativity in the lineup. There's far too much. A team that can play the lanes and block the lanes seems to be able to absolutely destroy us, and especially in the playoffs. Like, obviously in the playoffs. The New York Islanders did it. Montreal was having a time with it, and they shouldn't, because they're not that type of team. So
they weren't that good to do it.
Right. So creativity. A guy like Mete would be some great creativity on the back end that I think we wanted. And I'm not blaming anybody, because we were supposed to already have that with somebody that we need to get rid of, which you already know that is.
Right. Yeah, he's 20. Yeah, he's 22. So he's a guy they liked. They probably, like I said, they probably rushed him as a 4th-round pick because they needed bodies out there. And then they started trading up for some veterans, and you said they just got Joel Edmondson. What was that, from St. Louis?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he was in Carolina.
No.
At the
Carolina,
time.
that's
okay.
right. He'd already been traded. Right. They got Jake Allen from St. Louis. So
Yeah.
that's it's going to be really interesting. I mean, the fourthperiod.com was out there saying that the Flyers are one of the first teams out there aggressively trying to move salary, and yet other teams have actually made the moves and avoided the rumors. So
Yeah.
yeah, so, yes, Steele. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the rumors that I did hear was the Ty Domi or the Max Domi coming
Max
to
Domi,
Max Domi coming.
Yeah, Ty
to,
would be a hell of a
from
rumor.
Montreal. Yeah, right. Max Domi coming, his son, coming to Philly. That might potentially be something that we could look at. There's a lot of other players too, and a lot of other rumors swirling around too. But I think we pretty much all nailed it on the head. We need to do something now, as much as we can, to try to help this team along and to try to get as many skilled players in front of Carter Hart as possible. Because I think our window is already passed with the G's and the Voraceks. Okay, this should be Couturier's team. Okay, I'm putting it out there now. Look, I love G. I have been a fan of his since day one. I've loved Jake Voracek since he's first come in, and I look at them as some of the greatest Flyers to ever play. But it's time to pass the torch.
Well, it might not be done in terms of taking the C off or anything like that. But
I'm not. No, not advocating that at all.
No, but it is Couturier's team. He's probably the best all-around player on the team, and I don't think anybody would argue that. He's Dan on our last show expressed concern about the number of MCL tears he's had, because he's had about 3 or 4 over the span of his career, and he's never been a great skater to begin with. So it's a little bit irresolute today. It's really hard to settle on what the Flyers are going to do, and I think a lot of that will be helped along by that first move that Chuck Fletcher makes on and around the draft. I do think I have spoken with TFP correspondent Anthony DeMarco about a possible Domi for Ghost swap. And
Straight up.
It could be straight up. I think the Flyers might have to add something. I'm not sure. But then since the Canadians got Edmondson, might not need that. So it might require other players. Perlo, Scott Lawton, is he a must-have player? Is he a guy that could be on the block to facilitate a trade?
I don't think he's a must-have player. I think he's a valuable player. If we can use him in a package to bring, let's face it, one thing that was really missing from our team in the playoffs was that high percentage shooter. I think that's and I think we're not talking about it because it almost seems like fantasy to bring one in. But if we could clear up this Ghost contract or something like that and get a guy like a Hoffman or something like that. Ooh,
oh yeah.
Now we're talking about.
All right. Yeah. Let's talk about this.
That's what we're really talking about here, right? That's what we all just kind of are afraid to say.
Well, I think Line A's the guy. Yeah, Line A's the guy. I think we're.
Line A.
Yeah, but that would cost.
All of a sudden, Giroux knows how to pass the puck if he's got Line A on his wing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, okay.
Who doesn't know how to pass the puck?
Let's dig in a little bit. I think Line A's a fantasy because the return that would probably include players like Morgan Frost and Travis Sanheim. So
there'd be a lot of people.
If I were them, that's what I would ask for. Yeah.
At least.
Like I said, include. But I think when you look at Hoffman, here's the deal. Hoffman essentially is a replacement for JVR. They're very similar players. In fact, JVR is probably actually a better 5-on-5 player. But here's the deal. Hoffman is one thing JVR is not. He's a shooter. There's areas of the ice where he is absolute money. And all you have to do is look at the power play goal leaders over the last 4 or 5 years, and he's right there. So, and here's the thing. He's 30. JVR is just about to turn 32. They're very comparable age-wise. But Are you going down the same kind of, gully though with a Hoffman contract? You know, it's the same kind of player. He's streaky. He disappears. You know, with Hoffman, even though he's better on the power play at this stage of his career, JVR's ability on the power play the last 2 years seems to have disappeared. Are we gaining anything, or are we getting back into the same old rut with maybe a better power play contributor in Mike Hoffman?
That's
either one of you guys.
Right? Is it the same money? Is it the same money?
Yeah, probably.
If it's the same money, then I would take that.
But he's going to want like 5 years at least.
You still got to get rid of that contract, though.
And you got to get rid of JVR, too.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that if we could just swap it out, if we could just have Huffman for JVR.
No.
Because it's the same money, right?
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
Right.
Yeah. If we could just... if we're all dreaming here, you know,
that's it. We're all dreaming here. If it's the same money, I take that all day. Because I would much rather have that guaranteed production on the power play than the iffy production on the power play. Because we have enough guys on our team to play really well 5-on-5.
But the problem is Hoffman doesn't seem like he's losing a step where JVR does. Let's face it.
Yeah.
JVR seems like he's crashing pretty hardcore, where Hoffman looks like he's still got a lot of legs. And give him the right guys to play with, he can pot 30 to 35 goals a year comfortably. Now, but what you're saying also is that what is he going to cost and for how long? And when he does start to falter, are we not in the same boat that we were with JVR anyways? So,
that is a dilemma, because he's going to be probably, even this year when the contracts are going to be smaller, I would imagine he's going to be in that 6.5, 7.5 range.
Yep. Probably,
and you can put him with Oscar and Couturier, and it won't be the fastest line, but you got two defensively responsible guys with Hoffman. They could probably work it out. I could see it. It could work for a couple years.
Score. That's what's awesome about Hoffman. He doesn't need a playmate. He can score.
He can do it by himself.
And
he's also pretty creative too. So
yeah. Now he is. He's a really good offensive player. But then, so we somehow, some way replace Hoffman. Replace JVR with Hoffman, but our biggest need, if you listen to the pundits like Bill Meltzer, is that third line center, and he doesn't want to cross his fingers hoping that Nolan will come back or having to put Scott Lawton out there. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's whack-a-mole.
I like Soderberg, but I don't know if we have the space for him now.
Right.
If we get rid of JVR contract and we bring Hoffman, we still got space for Soderberg. We got a very veteran team. It's time to win now, boys and girls, because trade deadline, just keep on adding.
Are you noticing a theme here? He keeps going back to that Soderberg guy.
Yeah.
I know. I'm just
saying, okay, I looked.
It's a good idea, though.
And that was the most reasonable one, because we do have some young players that are going to be ready. We don't want to be spending tons of money. Say bring in Domi. Okay, well, what are we going to give up for Domi, right? And then we got a young guy that only wants to play center, and we got young guys that want to come up and play center. So what do we do with them? I mean,
okay, but see, like with what you talked about right there, if Montreal needs that puck moving offensive defenseman, that would be perfect fit for Ghost. I mean, look, we're all dreaming here. Look, this is all dream world.
Yeah,
until we find out exactly what happens.
But you know what? You saw how Montreal played. They actually need a little bit more offense up front, not so much on the back line. And now they have Edmondson, who's a steady Eddie kind of guy. So I don't know what they're really going to have a need for Ghost. But Ghost is going to go somewhere, I think, if anywhere, if not Montreal, certainly you have to look at Winnipeg, which is just hemorrhaging defensemen. Over the last little bit. It's Josh Morrissey and the JV crew. So they lost Bufflin, and obviously they lost Trouba, and they're probably thanking their lucky stars they didn't pay Trouba that money. But it's going to be a fantastic off-season, and we'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully we've thrown some things in front of some people that may be interesting. Some other players that may be on the move, Steele, just... Josh Anderson. Well, we talked about Max Domi. Dumba. Yeah. Apparently, Minnesota, Bill Guerin is anxious to change that elements on that team. I think Marc-Andre Fleury is definitely leaving. Tampa is probably going to have to lose a guy like Killorn. Darcy Kemper is rumored to be leaving. Matt Murray is not going to be in Pittsburgh. Brandon Saad is leaving Chicago. So all these guys,
Johnny Gaudreau probably won't come back to Calgary. Oh, that's another name that could potentially be thrown in there. Who's that other guy that they just announced too that said that he was going to be Pavelski or somebody like that who was going to come out as a free agent, is not going to be re-signed by his team. So I mean, there's going to be a plethora. Pietrangelo, that's it.
Yeah, Pietrangelo. Yeah. Oh, that's Pietrangelo sweepstakes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's going to be a lot of people out there that we could potentially sway, but what are we going to have to give up? What are we going to have to eat? Who are we going to have to release?
And then
what are we going to have to do?
And then the dominoes.
Yeah.
Pietrangelo goes to Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto has to lose somebody like Nylander. So where does Nylander go? They're not going to want to trade him east to us because we could use Nylander.
No.
So here we go. And it could be three-way trades. It could be like, well, it's really not quite a three-way trade. Nylander, for example, gets traded out west, but then the team out west decides to make a deal with us, and we end up with Nylander, which might tick off Toronto. Everybody's going to act in their own interests right now. So
yeah.
So
I'm telling you right now,
it's going to be a free-for-all.
Exactly what we need.
Who?
If we could find a way to do
get
it.
Nylander, yeah. Look for the draft. I'm looking for the draft to be a huge thing this year, above any other year, because for one, it's got some players in it that could potentially go really well. There's definitely a number one guy out there in the draft. Okay, with Lafreniere. So there's definitely some value in the draft this year. Plus, with all the free agents and all the teams looking to shed salaries and other teams, you know what I mean? This is going to be the most exciting draft, I think, that NHL has had in a very, very, very long time.
Okay, I'm going to say something that a lot of people aren't going to like, but I don't think. But I think there's never been a time. I don't think there's ever been a time when a first-round draft pick has more value than this year.
Yeah.
And honestly, I would trade our first.
For us, the 23rd pick, yeah, I would too.
I would trade our first.
And Russ Cohen said he wouldn't do it, so I don't know. And then our buddy Jamie Basco just
show.
What?
Yeah, he said he wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't do it.
You guys' show, he wouldn't do it. Yeah.
And Jamie Basco put out an article today for Flyers Nitty Gritty.
Yeah.
And he was talking about actually moving up. And the kid he went at, he suggested going after an exciting player, but again, not a player that would help us anytime soon.
But he was talking about moving up, though, not
moving up
moving up
and drafting Seth Jarvis.
Yeah.
The right winger was about 5'10", 175 now, but he's got tremendous speed, tremendous shot.
Oh.
It sounds a little bit like a Cole Caulfield, not quite as developed right now, but he's bigger than Cole, and he has a bigger frame. And he's got incredible hockey sense, and it sounds like a Giroux, but more of a skater.
Zach Parise.
Yeah?
He is Zach Parise is what he is. So
Matt Jarvis.
Think about that.
Yeah.
But
So
now, what are you going to do? You know what you're going to give up to move up? It's going to make you, sick to your stomach. In this draft to move up, you're going to be like, no, you got to be kidding me. I got to get Farabee's gone.
No, they're not going to do that. Farabee's their future.
Yes, they are.
Well, they wouldn't do it.
Nobody is going to give up their top 15 picks without some serious offers.
Well, that's fine, but I'm saying the Flyers wouldn't do it. That's all I'm saying. They wouldn't do it.
I'm just saying it's not going to, and I'm saying it's not going to happen because that's what you're going to have to do.
Yeah. That's not crazy. I mean, I agree.
Why don't we staple this first to Gosh DeSpeer and Van Riemsdyk and see what the heck if we can get rid of those contracts. That's probably got more value to us right now than the actual pick, which we don't even know if it's going to pan out. We need to get rid of cap space, period. That's when it comes down to.
Yep.
Staple the first to those two guys, see what we can get, see if we can get rid of them, And if we can, now we've got some cap space to start doing something with our roster, because right now we simply only get Soderbergs and Metes.
Yeah.
And
the thing is,
I don't think having this conversation, I don't think any of us think that that's enough to get us over the Tampa Bay Lightning next year.
No. And the thing is, to do that, if the Flyers had more higher end talent in the waiting, they really have Frost and York, and everybody else is more like mid-6.
Exactly.
That's the
why
problem.
I like what Hextall was doing.
Yeah. Well, but he had a lot of picks, and he missed on guys like Rubtsov and some other players. He had a good batting average, but he didn't get an Aho, he didn't get a Svechnikov, and that hurts, because that would give me the flexibility to feel better about trading a number 1 pick. So
I know it's a tough one to do.
It is. So last thing, in terms of this year, look for these teams to be open to taking salaries and getting some nice young talent. Ottawa, Winnipeg, Buffalo, the Avalanche. Well, they're not going to take a bad contract. They're going to go out there in free agency and get somebody, probably a goalie at least. Detroit, the LA Kings, and the Devils all have a lot of cap space. So those are teams the Flyers should look at to take a contract, at least some of them, along with having to trade a fair amount of talent. With that, I just want to pivot over to the Stanley Cup Finals, as the Tampa Bay Lightning are up 3-1. Steele, what do you think about what we've seen so far? And do you think the Dallas Stars have the ability to come back and make this a series?
Well, okay, I picked Dallas over the Tampa Bay Lightning in 7 games, and I thought this was going to be a back and forth series. But I also thought that if Stamkos came back to play, even if it was only 1 game, would be a difference maker in the series. And quite honestly, with the overtime win from last night, I don't see Dallas coming back. I see this being Tampa Bay's cup. If Stamkos did not play, and if Dallas would have won that game, okay, if Stamkos didn't play and Dallas would have won that game, and it would have went back and forth, then I would have felt that Dallas would have won. But because Stamkos came in and played, and not only played but scored, okay, and they just utterly destroyed Dallas 5-2. I mean, that game was a statement game. And I think last night's game was kind of one too, because they came out and played without Stamkos, and they still outplayed them. They still outshot them for most of the game, and then they won the game. So, yeah, I don't think Dallas has a. Even though I picked them, I don't think they have it in them to take care of it tonight, especially a back-to-back, and I just don't see it. I think Tampa Bay is going to.
Yeah, I did pick Tampa, but I want to say that Steele also picked Dallas as one of his teams to make the finals. So
sleeper team. They were my sleeper team, so yeah.
But Tampa has that defense figured out in Dallas, and they had one of the big things they had that maybe Vegas should have had actually, but didn't philosophically go about and do it, is using creativity to get Hudobin going back and forth in his net. And that's what they're doing. And their defense, for some reason, which is mobile enough, but is stuck in a system in their heads that they can't seem to get around. They can't seem to get around this idea of being able to spread out and take a man-on-man approach. And when they do, it's just like a disaster in their defensive end. I really do appreciate Dallas this year. It's been fun to watch. Hudobin is awesome. I'll always remember how great he's been through these playoffs, and I think that there's big things ahead of Dallas with Rick Bowness. Give him more time to work out that system, and you could see a cup winner next year. But I think it's if not over tonight, it's certainly going to be over eventually.
Fair enough. I think Tampa is going to win their second Stanley Cup. And one that we thought the first time the Flyers really had their best chance to win since, I guess, when they lost out to Tampa in their semifinals. That was really a rough win back there in 2004. check
I
that.
was just going to say, yeah, 2004. That was a tough. We were beat up in that series, though. We came into that series. That was the one after the Toronto series, right?
We had no
And we
D-man.
came in just crushed in that series. So that's why Tampa Bay beat us.
Yeah. Yeah, we just needed defensemen, and we had Sammy Kapanen on defense or something.
Yeah,
Crazy. All right.
And even then, he got rocked in the Toronto series where he didn't know where he was for 3 days.
Yeah, Darcy Tucker. Yeah, that was rough. And with that, gents, we're going to wrap it up for today. I just want to tell the listeners, stay tuned. We have great author Alan Bass. He wrote a book, Professional Hockey in Philadelphia, A History. And it's a fascinating book that takes you exactly like it sounds like through the history of professional hockey. There's great stories in there. There's a surprise about how close the Flyers were to not being able to make the commitment, and the Flyers might have gone down to a city south of here from Philadelphia. And a whole bunch of stories, great stories about the Philadelphia Blazers. It's something out of Slapshot. Crazy stuff. So stay tuned for the interview I conducted with Alan Bass, and check out the book on Amazon, Professional Hockey in Philadelphia, A History. And with that, gents, let's get some IDs here. Perlo, where can people find you and your work on Twitter and elsewhere?
Perlo's NHL POW is my Twitter, but if you want to find all my information, steelflyers.com. Check it out, man. It is already a cool site, but when we are done, it's going to be amazing. So all my stuff will be there. You'll be able to find me there. You can also go to my YouTube at My NHL Pearls of Wisdom as well. Besides that, Steel Flyers, it's all there. Just all you got to do is go find me on his Friends of Steel Flyers. Click it. It's all my information's there.
Fantastic. Steel?
Thanks for having me, man. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to be here. You can find me on Twitter at SteelFlyers52. Also, you can find all the latest Steel Flyers information on www.steelflyers.com. You can find links to the O&B Puckcast guys right there. You can find links to all your Twitter handles and everything right there, too, for all the guys from O&B Puckcast. So go there and check out all your great stuff. And you can go there and check out all of Perlo's stuff and all of our stuff, too.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you guys coming on. We wanted to give the fans a little extra this week. There's a Jewish holiday. We won't be available, and we're going to miss some things, so we want to bring you a show, and I really appreciate it. You can follow the O&B Puckcast on several podcast platforms. You can catch us on Twitter, of course, at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And now we are on a new platform, so you got to check out Radio Public. The Radio Public platform, I believe they have an app as well. You can go to radiopublic.com, and we're vying for some others. We'll keep you up to date there. And, of course, you can catch us on Apple, SoundCloud, iHeart, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher. We have YouTube. So we got it all covered. So stay tuned for the interview with Alan, and I think you'll really enjoy that. So we'll be right back. Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. As promised, we are back with the author of an exciting new book. The author is Alan Bass. He's a Hockey News contributor, and he has just written his, Alan, your second book about hockey?
That's right.
And it's called Professional Hockey in Philadelphia, A History. And I got to tell you, Alan, this is a trip down memory lane for me. Why don't you give us a little background about the book and why you felt compelled to write it?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on first off. It's really a pleasure to chat with you here. The book is about all of the professional hockey teams that have played in Philadelphia from the 1890s all the way through the Phantoms and everyone in between. Just about every Philadelphia hockey book is a Flyers book. For obvious reasons, and they're obviously deserving of their spot in sports history in this city, but it's extremely important to me to understand the groundwork that was laid here before they started in 67 that helped lead to their success, along with the teams that essentially tried to compete with them during their history. It tells the story not just of hockey, but of 20th century Philadelphia, the ups and downs in the city, the ups and downs of the sport, through the lens of the hockey teams and many of the characters that played here, that coached here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that grabbed me looking through the book and really absorbing a lot of the stories in there that were just really captivating. We're seeing these kids in the 30s playing hockey or something like hockey without quite having the equipment. And it reminds me that in the late 60s when we started playing hockey in Juniata, Feltonville section where I grew up, and we had the wooden hockey sticks and the makeshift equipment before Milek came out with their stuff. So you don't get there unless there is some kind of tradition of playing this game. And like you said, it starts out with the Quaker City Hockey Club from the American Amateur Hockey League, and most of us don't know that there actually was one. What's unique about that first experience with hockey in Philadelphia?
So that started through a guy named George Orton, who came down from Canada to the University of Pennsylvania to run track. But being Canadian, of course, hockey was one of his true loves. And so he introduced the city to hockey. There's really no documented history of the sport here before he came down in the 1890s. And through the University of Pennsylvania, and then even after he left the school, he is the one that really laid the groundwork for hockey to take off in the city. So, he kind of threw a team together. They threw a league together with some teams in the region. They even went up to New York to challenge some of the better amateur teams at the time. This is well before the NHL was in existence. And it was kind of a makeshift thrown together league, but it really illustrates the potential for the sport in the city at the time. And it was 30 more years before you even had a bona fide professional hockey team in the city with the Arrows. But, Orton really laid that groundwork. He really put that together. He had the connections with the city. He helped get one of the first ice arenas built in the city. And it's, like you said, it's really crucial to go way back and see, really those coals in the fire that he laid and that others laid that eventually turned into the teams that led to the Flyers in the 60s. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned the Arrows, and that was a period that overlapped, I believe, with the 1 year that there actually was an NHL team in Philadelphia, even though it did not originate in Philadelphia. Maybe a quick blurb about the Quakers of 1930-31.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Quakers started out as the Pittsburgh Pirates, and a hockey team, of course, not the baseball team. And they began struggling at the gate on the ice, and there was an ownership change, and it got a little complex. Enter Benny Leonard, the famous boxer from the era. Even though the team was owned by Bill Dwyer, Leonard was the one that was kind of the face of the team. He was the public owner of the team, and he moved the city to Philadelphia temporarily. It was understood that it was just going to come for maybe a year or two while Pittsburgh tried to get their act together. And it was, without a doubt, the worst season in NHL history, perhaps until the Capitals came in, but you could still argue that the Quakers were just one of the most futile teams ever to appear. The attendance was awful. They set a record that they still hold for the fewest wins in an NHL season. But it's interesting because in the story of the Quakers, you start to understand why certain teams in Philadelphia succeeded and failed over the course of the years. And it actually gave a very good guidance for future teams. The Arrows were very successful as a minor league franchise, and the Quakers as a major league franchise were not successful in the slightest bit by any measure. And so it's interesting to contrast the two and the teams that came after them up through the Flyers to really see, why was this team successful? Why was this team not successful? And it kind of gave a guideline for the Flyers and other teams to follow or ignore at their own peril. So that's one of the reasons that, it's so crucial to go through even a team like the Comets, who played 16 games and didn't win a single one in the 30s. It's so crucial to go through all of those teams to really understand why hockey took off eventually the way it did.
Yeah, you learn something along the way, and you hope that these owners take notice. Apparently, some of them didn't, as we'll talk about a little bit later. But one of the franchises that established itself, the name itself, the Ramblers, and they did so while changing leagues and kind of upgrading the level of competition that they went through in the 30s and into 1941.
Right. So you're referring to the first Ramblers, I assume,
Yes.
the AHL team, right? So the Ramblers were kind of a continuation of the Arrows, but instead of being an independent team, the Ramblers were actually the minor league franchise of the Rangers, which would be why the team's name began with an R, and their jersey was the similar blue-red that we see today in the Rangers uniforms. Right. And they, because they had the backing of one of the stronger NHL teams at the time, the Rangers won a couple Stanley Cups around that era. You really start to see hockey become really successful. You start to see the fans really get behind the teams. You start to see players and characters and really future star players make their debut in Philadelphia. Without going on a tangent here, getting off topic, there were so many Hall of Fame players that went through the city that never played for the Flyers. Just the teams they played for. Sid Howe played for the Quakers. He ended up in the Hall of Fame, of course, through his work elsewhere, not with the Quakers.
Right.
There's guys on the Ramblers that were in the Hall of Fame. There's so many phenomenal players and just characters that came through the city. And the Ramblers were a huge example. They were the first Philadelphia hockey franchise to win a championship. And the city went nuts for them. I mean, it really was an accomplishment for the city and for the sport. It really helped kind of push it to the next level. Yeah,
and as it says later in the book, I forget who actually, I don't know if it was Bill Barber or somebody, at Philadelphia, oh no, it's Eric Malash or somebody, Philadelphia loves winners. And no true words have ever been spoken by an athlete.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was here with the metamorphosis of Philadelphia from the city of losers coming out of the late 60s into the 70s and seeing that changing around. And, of course, the Flyers were the catalyst for that. But so the association with the Rangers was severed, and then the Ramblers, they became the Falcons, or did Falcons just kind of pick up with some players that were on the other team? How did that work out?
Right. So what happened was the Ramblers, the end of their life was kind of about world. The war was coming about,
sure,
and there was a real struggle to get players. And basically, Lester Patrick, who ran the Rangers, just had enough. And in about 24 hours, he sold the entire team, all the players at least, and they just shut the team down. At that point, the Philadelphia Arena, which was where all the teams played at that point, had the confidence that they would be able to operate their own team just like the Ramblers did. I guess not realizing that when you didn't have the support of a National Hockey League organization behind you in terms of players and talent, it's a lot easier said than done. And they learned that quickly. They floundered around for a while between the Rockets and the Falcons in the American Hockey League and the Eastern Amateur League, which was the precursor to the EHL. And they really floundered for most of the 40s. Attendance was weak. They came very close to a couple championships, but attendance never really followed consistently. They had a couple good weeks, a couple good months here and there, but it really showed kind of a foreshadowing for independent teams as you got into the era of television. When you get into the 60s and the 70s, you really needed a strong backing, whether it was an organizational structure with other businesses like the Flyers had, whether it was the support of another organization like the Ramblers had with the Rangers. An independent team, it was really difficult for it to succeed all on its own. And that's kind of the point in Philadelphia hockey history you get to through the Rockets and the Falcons.
Yeah. So now we start heading into, and actually I want to tell the listeners, as we're kind of skipping through this, just give you some bullet points, the highlights. There are some great stories within most of these chapters, and it's all chock full of information, of course. But you really want to dig in here. If you love the game of hockey and you love the Flyers and Philadelphia hockey, you got to pick this up. It was like a magnet. I was just really engrossed. All that aside, there's the Ramblers in another form, an Eastern Hockey League form, start in 1955, and really, to me, that's like the modern basis for hockey in Philadelphia in the minds of people my age and a little bit younger.
Absolutely, and they were also the last team to play in, at that point, what was the decrepit Philadelphia Arena. I mean, it was really, for lack of a better term, it was a dump at that point. I mean, it really needed upgrades. The ownership of the arena wasn't what it needed to be. And so when you had a lack of a good arena mixed with some problematic ownership over the course of some years with the Ramblers, despite the support that team did have, they really did struggle. I mean, they lasted for a pretty long time, almost a full decade, which was, up towards the top of any other Philadelphia franchise to that point. But what's interesting about the Ramblers and the Eastern Hockey League as a whole is almost the cult following that it developed. I mean, it was the league that kind of spurned the North American Hockey League, both of which together were the league behind Slapshot. And even today, you see the fans of the Eastern Hockey League. I mean, they love that league. They love talking about those old players and the toughness of those players and the fun of those games. And, Slapshot, it's always joked about, is more a documentary than a movie because it was so realistic as to what was going on in the Eastern leagues and in the North American League. And that's really the story of the Ramblers. It was a shame that they didn't work out longer than they did because they did have such devoted fans. But, as the last team that came in before the Flyers, it was a perfect foreshadowing for why you needed such strong ownership in order to be successful at hockey at any level, especially in a city that had such diehard supporters for the other sports.
Right. And what was the Grace Kelly connection with the Ramblers? I thought that was really interesting.
So Grace Kelly, Kelly's sister was married to George Davis, who was an executive for the Ramblers. So Grace Kelly attended a lot of Ramblers games. The players got to meet her a couple times. It's just a cute little connection there that I didn't know before I started delving into the research for this.
Yeah, that's why you gotta get professional hockey in Philadelphia, a history, at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and any of your fine local bookstores. It seems like those are the only two that people talk about anymore. But then we come to, before we get into the Flyers. Look, so what was the demise of the Ramblers? What was that about?
So it's never really been fully clear. There was an ownership issue that kind of came suddenly. In 1964, right before the next season was about to start, the league just kind of suddenly announced that they were suspending the Ramblers franchise because they hadn't paid their money into escrow for the coming league season. It never was really revealed what happened deeper than that, but there was a small group. There was a group of owners. It wasn't just one person, and they all kind of pointed fingers at each other, and a few of them said it was this guy's fault, and it's really kind of messy. And like I said, it was really a shame because the team did have some really strong fans. They really had some diehards there, and it was a great introduction to hockey for people. But when you don't have strong ownership, that's inevitably what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a 3-year gap, and hearkening back to the discussion about you writing your first book, The Great Expansion, it kind of gave you the motivation to write this book. So let's talk about The Great Expansion briefly and how it ties in with the Flyers and what you wrote.
Right. So the Great Expansion, as most Flyers fans will know, if they've looked back at the team's history, occurred in 1967 when the NHL decided to double the size of the league from 6 to 12. You had the original 6 teams ever since 1942, and the NHL was really being pressured from all sides to expand. They were kind of sitting in the back of the cave while all the other sports leagues were realizing that expansion was big and TV contracts were starting to come in, and the NHL's 6 teams were selling to almost full capacity. And at that point, there's not many other places to grow if you're selling to 100% capacity at the gate. They had approached some TV networks for a deal, and basically the response was kind of a ho-hum, let us know when you expand a little bit. Let us know when you're in the Bay Area. Let us know when you're on the West Coast. Let us know when you're in the United States more. Of the 6 teams, only 4 of them were in the U.S., and all 4 of them were kind of closer to the Canadian border than they were to the southern part of the states.
Right.
So it was really a regional league. It wasn't a national league. And the NHL, as much as most of those owners, the Harold Ballard types, the Clarence Campbell types, as much as they did not want to expand, they were almost backed into a corner, especially by Rangers president Bill Jennings, who, hockey wasn't where he made his money. He was successful elsewhere, and he was looking at it as a businessman, saying, if we can expand this league, and if we can put $2 million in each of our pockets as expansion fees, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we want to expand this game? And so it was really a kind of a push and pull and a give and take between the old guard of the league and a guy like Jennings who wanted to see the league move into the future. And that's kind of where Ed Snyder comes in, a kind of a visionary businessman who sees ahead when other people are kind of stuck a few years behind.
Yeah, and that's the concentration when you talk about the Flyers in your book, because there's certainly we can chronicle all the fine books like Gene Hart's Score and some of Jay Greenberg's books about the history of the Flyers. What you do here is more about how it all got started, and there's tug of war, if you will, between Ed Snyder and Jerry Wolman.
Yeah, and so going to your first point, I didn't want to write about the Flyers in the way that everyone else did, because it's been written about, and wonderfully at that. Jay Greenberg's books are, it's one of those things that should be on every Flyers fan's bookshelf. Full spectrum, Flyers at 50. They're phenomenal histories, and there's no way to compete with those, nor would I want to. There's nothing else to tell in terms of the on-ice product. So instead, I wanted to really talk about the story that hasn't been talked about too much. Ed Snyder was very sensitive to the story of him and his partner, Jerry Wolman, who owned the Eagles at the time and was involved in the ownership group of what was then called the Philadelphia Hockey Club before the Flyers were named. He really didn't like talking about that story. It was a very painful memory for him that time. And since he passed, I felt it was really important to go into that story because, it can be told from so many different perspectives. But at the end of the day, it's a very sad story, if nothing else, of two brothers, Snyder and Wolman, who, Wolman handpicked Snyder to run the Eagles, which a lot of Flyers fans may not know about that era of Snyder's life. He ran the Eagles for a few years when he first moved to Philadelphia from Washington, D.C. And, he and Wolman together embarked on this plan to get a hockey team and to build a brand new arena, the Spectrum. And then it just broke up out of nowhere and very nastily, taking shots at each other in the media. And for decades and decades, the two wouldn't talk other than, veiled shots in the media. And, Wolman wrote a biography later in life that took shots at Snyder, and Snyder was on, it was a very unfortunate breaking up because, Wolman was, kind of the up and coming star in Philadelphia, and Snyder was right on his tail. And the two together were quite a team. So the story of the Flyers, at least in this book, is a story of that brotherhood, of that partnership, and then how it eventually broke up, and really the sadness that occurred because of that. Now, of course, Philadelphia is very fortunate, as was Ed Snyder, that the Flyers had the success they did. He grew it into such a wonderful business empire. But, in 67, nobody knew what was going to happen. They could have folded up in a year. There was a lot of financial issues in those early days, especially with the roof issue on the Spectrum. And so the story of the two of them, struggling to get this team on the ground, and then the further struggles when Ed was left on his own to get the funding for the $2 million expansion fee at the last minute. Ed had nothing to his name. He didn't have millions of dollars. He mortgaged his entire life in order to save this franchise before it had even played a game. And that's the story I thought was important to tell. It wasn't so much who founded the Flyers, because there's always an argument and a discussion, but it's who saved the Flyers. And there was an unfortunate situation with Jerry Wolman, which I won't go into because everyone can read about it if they buy the book, of course.
Right.
But it's the story about how Snyder took a really difficult situation and saved the team that may have otherwise relocated to Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, there's that story about, getting the funding at the last minute, didn't know if the check was going to clear, if I got that right. And it was, it's harrowing, and it's in that chapter. You want to check it out. Ed Snyder definitely was a visionary, and he had a rock-solid spine. It took it, because you read this at how the risk-taking that was required to keep this thing together. And it went down to the last minute.
It sure did. There's a great mini story in there about the Baltimore was the first alternate team if one of the teams couldn't pay the $2 million expansion fee, and they were waiting outside the boardroom in Montreal with their check, with the assumption that the Philadelphia team wasn't going to be able to make the payment because there were already rumors going around, and they were sitting there holding their check, laughing. And, of course, they weren't laughing when the Philadelphia group came out having paid for their franchise.
Yeah, and thank God for that. They are who they are today. of course, overlapping that period when the Flyers were kind of a team that was struggling to make the playoffs, I lived through Jerry Meehan's shot in 1972, I believe. And just as the Flyers were headed toward cup contention, but we didn't know that in 1972, there was this upstart league called the World Hockey Association, took the sports world by storm and recruited a lot of players from the NHL, because now it was time for hockey players to get paid. And I think one of the first big ones was Bobby Hull. And then there was a franchise, was it the Miami Screaming Eagles? And
yes.
Maybe you can take it from there to give us a little background on that chapter about the Philadelphia Blazers.
Certainly. So, yeah, Miami had been awarded an expansion franchise in the WHA, which was already kind of creating a stir with, like I said, the old guard of the NHL who didn't want to pay their players well, most teams at least, and didn't want to treat them properly. And the WHA comes around. These two guys, Gary Davidson and Dennis Murphy, who had created the American Basketball Association for the same reason years earlier, they now created this rival hockey league. And these owners are offering security, long-term contracts, 6-figure, 7-figure incomes, which, was insane and unheard of for hockey players at the time. And so you've got guys like Bernie Perron, who leaves the Toronto organization to sign a $750,000 contract, which, at the time was incredible, with the Miami franchise, which turned out not to even come into an existence because they had plans to put an arena in place and it kind of fizzled out. And so they relocated the franchise to Philadelphia at the last second. And that's where you get the Blazers from. And you could go on endlessly of the stories, both good and bad, about the Blazers. Obviously they only lasted 1 year, had a lot of financial problems, but they also had some phenomenal stories. Derek Sanderson, they lured away from the Bruins, and what a character he was. Got Andre Lacroix as one of the most dynamic offensive stars in that league's first season, playing for the Blazers. And then you've also got a little bit of kind of the shots back and forth to the Flyers as the two owners of the Blazers, Jim Cooper and Bernie Brown, wanted to almost play chicken with this NHL franchise who couldn't seem to get over that next hump to win. Like you said, it's 72 at this point. Everyone's holding their breath, waiting for a championship that hasn't yet come. So it's a great story about the competition between the two teams. And again, going back to, when you don't have solid ownership and smart business decisions being made, no matter how good or bad the hockey team is on the ice, no matter what support you have or don't have, you just can't make it. And that's the story of the Blazers in a nutshell.
Yeah, that overlapped. Let me say, I was 12 and 13 when they were in town. And Derek Sanderson was right out of Slapshot in a lot of ways with his excesses in his lifestyle. And he was, I remember him with the Bruins. I was very young, and he was kind of like that second line player, really good. But it sure was nice to have Espo and Orr and Busick around him. And now he had to be the star and go out there on opening night. And I'm going to let people who aren't familiar with the story, let's just say he had to talk to the fans about something that no player wants to talk to the fans about. And I remember, believe it, that's right in my scrapbook as well. Talk about humiliation, but it wasn't Derek's fault. And they had Johnny Pye, McKenzie, and of course, we talked about Bernie, and Bernie didn't look really comfortable as a Blazer at any time, and they got off to a tough start, but they did rally, and I do have some notations, and I did score some of those games. They didn't last too long. The league lasted until, what is it, 79?
Right. That's when they merged or whatever the legal term was with the NHL.
Yeah. The Blazers went out to Western Canada after, one season.
Right.
And the Flyers didn't really have any competition per se, but there was another team that did head into town in a minor league, and those, of course, were the Philadelphia Firebirds, who started out in the North American Hockey League and then were upgraded to the American Hockey League, but never affiliated, I don't believe, with the Flyers.
Correct.
Right. So, yeah, I knew it wasn't in in 77 and 79 when they were the AHL team. But I actually saw them when they were in the AHL in 78, and they played at the Philly Convention Center in West Philly.
Right. They played at what was then known as the Civic Center, the Convention Center, like you said. And what's fascinating about the Firebirds, it kind of lays the groundwork for the fandoms eventually, in that, like you said, they were, technically competing with the Flyers, but a minor league team and a major league team don't really compete because you're going for a different audience. And you also had the issue at the time, the Firebirds came in 1974. The Flyers had just won the Stanley Cup, and the city was just, they were going nuts, and you couldn't get a seat at the Spectrum at all. There was a waiting list for season tickets. So if you wanted to watch hockey at the time, without a big national TV deal and with TV, with the Flyers games sometimes only available in South Philly, you needed another option. You couldn't get your hockey fix. And the Firebirds were a minor league team with cheap ticket prices relative to the Flyers. And it really allowed for a family fun night that didn't break the bank. Whether you could get tickets to the Flyers or not, if you could, they were very expensive. And, it was a hefty night to take a family of four there. But, you get the Firebirds and you've got cheap tickets, you've got a fun night of entertainment. And of course, as a continuation of the Eastern League, you've got these slapshot-like personalities and these stories and these characters, both behind the bench and on the ice. And it really, like you said, everyone who watched Firebirds games when they were younger now talk about it like just such fond childhood memories of their experience watching these players and watching some of these antics on the ice. And, without giving anything away, this chapter is just, it's laugh out loud funny. I chatted with so many of the players and Greg Pilling, who was the coach of the team for the first few years, and just their memories. They're laughing at some of the memories. They still are close. They had the Firebirds won a championship in one of their first seasons, and the players from that team still get together every so often. They had a reunion a couple years back out in Arizona, and they all got together and they just told old stories and reminisced. And it's one of those things that the players were so close and the fans were so close to them, and there was just this mutual love between the fans and the players for that team, and they really had a good life for the 6 years that they were in the city.
Yeah, no question. I just wanted to go back to the Blazers. You said Andre Lacroix. That was a smart marketing move by them. Andre Lacroix was actually my first favorite Flyer. So to get him into Philadelphia was a little bit of a marketing coup in that regard. And regarding, going back to the Firebirds, one of the other draws for some Flyers fans is that the Flyers started actually keeping some of their draft picks, and they were going through that post-Cup kind of era depression, and they had some players, Dan Lucas, Ben Wilson, and of course Ken the Rat Lindsman. So I don't think Ben Wilson ever played in the AHL. If he did, I didn't recall it. But they were on the Maine Mariners, and the Mariners would visit the Firebirds, and that was one occasion in 1978. I bet you a whole bunch of people went in to see Ken the Rat Lindsman, who didn't disappoint, always the agitator. And those are the kind of things that made minor league hockey attractive as well, not just the idea that you couldn't get a ticket to the Flyers.
Absolutely. And you talk about that game where when the Firebirds first moved into the American League, when they played the Mariners, like you said, everyone was just buzzing because you had this minor league team that belonged to Philly playing the players that also belonged to Philly. And it was this weird kind of situation. And the Firebirds ended up winning with kind of a thrown together roster. They dominated. It was a 5-1 game. And Terry Murray, the guy who would eventually coach the Flyers, was actually a defenseman on that Firebirds team. And, there's a quote he's got that says, the odds of us winning had to be 95-1. And that was surely the case because the Firebirds did struggle in the AHL, but they beat the Mariners. And that was some bragging rights in the city for a while.
Yeah, definitely. So then there's almost, a 20-year gap between minor league affiliates being in the city of Philadelphia, and maybe talk about why the Phantoms came to Philadelphia in the first place in 1996.
So in that early 1990s period, and specifically in 1996, you essentially had what was a building problem for them. They were building the what was then the Core State Center, the state-of-the-art arena that was going to house the Flyers. But then they were left with a spectrum with no major tenant, and they tried to fill it with the Kicks and some other similar types of franchises, but they really needed a major tenant that they could guarantee 40 to 50 nights a year. It was really a conversation between Ed Snyder and Peter Luco, who would go on to be the chief operating officer of Comcast Spectacor for many years, and it was really a conversation on a train ride between the two of them, where Luco essentially said, why don't we put our minor league team in Philadelphia? And there ensued a discussion about, well, wouldn't it be competition? And then you go back to the kind of the Firebirds theory that, no, the competition with a Phantoms game or with a minor league hockey game isn't a major league hockey game, but it's the movies, it's some light shopping, it's a Dave and Buster's. That's the competition. You're going for that. Even in the 90s, tickets to the Flyers games were exorbitantly expensive relative to anything else. Obviously, nothing like they are today. But you really needed an opportunity to draw new people into the game, fan-wise. 96, you had the Legion of Doom really coming about. You had the Flyers going into that really strong period. The building was sold out, and people needed an opportunity to see hockey. And if they could put their own minor league team there and show the Flyers of tomorrow at $5-10 prices for tickets, that was a winning business decision. And you had the power of, at the time, a $1 billion corporation, which was Comcast, behind them. And so basically you have the business plan of the Firebirds with the financial backing of Comcast and the Flyers, and that's a winning formula right there. And sure enough, they were, if not the most, certainly one of the most successful American League teams for their 13-year span in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the Flyers were really insulated from competition because of the Legion of Doom. It was the house that Eric built, and you had this empty building, and it was a no-lose proposition. It was very convenient to have that team there, and I went to a couple games myself, and it was fun having them in town. And when they headed out the door, I guess it was Glen Falls, when they first left Philadelphia, that was a real bummer.
It was, but and that also wound up becoming a building issue as well. Right after they left was when they decided to take the Spectrum down, and it really was just a matter of the building was at the end of its useful life. It wasn't a state-of-the-art building even in '67. It was kind of a pile of brick thrown together to get a major league hockey team started, and after 40 years of patches and minor upgrades here and there, the building essentially needed an enormous upgrade internally, and it just was something that the organization couldn't warrant putting the money into. It didn't bring in nearly that kind of revenue to warrant the kind of debt required to upgrade that building. And so they looked for some different locations to place the Phantoms. They looked at different options in Cherry Hill, Atlantic City, Haddonfield, all in New Jersey, and it really turned out that they didn't have a solid place to put the team and to warrant continuing owning the team. And then just coincidentally, they were put in touch with the Brooks family, who had this big plan to build a complex up in Allentown, which of course took a few years longer than they wanted. Right. And really, at the end of the day, as sad as it was to see the Spectrum go, you had what was the best of both worlds. You now have the Phantoms as this major tenant in downtown Allentown, which I went to school up in Allentown. It wasn't the prettiest part of the city, and now you go up there and it's lively, it's vibrant. You've got this professional hockey team surrounded by restaurants and hotels, and it's really a vibrant spot in Allentown, and it's a perfect place for it. That city is buzzing with hockey fans that can't always make the hour-and-a-half long drive down the turnpike to see a Flyers game. So it really ended up being a perfect situation for both the Brooks family and the Phantoms, and of course the Flyers as well. They've still got their minor league team just up the road from them.
Right, and you get a little urban renewal out of that, and the thing is that you have two Calder Cups to look back upon in '98 and what was it, 2005? Was the lockout season?
Right, you had a star team there with Richards and Carter in the playoffs and Nitti Maki in net.
Right, and those guys really, particularly Carter, really kicked butt that playoff, and you had Pat Sharp was still around, turned out to be a best player out of the three, but That's a story for another day. Wow. And there's just so many stories in here. I got to tell all the O&B listeners, Professional Hockey in Philadelphia, A History by Alan Bass is a terrific book you want to add to your library. It's going to be part of your memorabilia and your collection of Flyers books. Alan, any other facts or things that you would want to share with the fans who prospectively want to pick this book up at Amazon or Barnes & Noble?
No, really all I would say is that, obviously the listeners to your podcast are Flyers fans, just like you and I, and we have a deep love for the city and a deep love for the sport. And that's why I wanted to write this book. It's just a love of the game and a love of this city. And anyone who has that love is going to want to pick this up and really just experience the history of the city through the lens of the sport that we all love.
Yeah, couldn't say it better myself. Of course, you're the author, so you're supposed to. Alan, thanks for doing this. Just, again, Professional Hockey in Philadelphia, A History. Check it out at Amazon. Alan Bass is the writer. And, Alan, where can people follow you on Twitter and other places on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter at Alan Bass Writing, and on Facebook, my page is Alan Bass. And that's where I'm posting some photos that weren't able to be included in the book and some tidbits that weren't able to be included in the book. So be sure to follow me there for some extras here and there on top of what's in the book.
Definitely check that out on Facebook. So, and with that, everybody, we're going to call it a night. Until next time, take care.